Malik sat hunched in the hallway chair, knees pressed together, hands folded in his lap like he'd been taught like he was supposed to. The jacket they made him wear pinched under his arms, the sleeves barely covering his wrists. His shoes, too tight now, pressed uncomfortably against his toes. He didn't say anything, hadn't said much in weeks. The overhead lights buzzed faintly above, cold and white. A ticking clock, somewhere behind the judge's door, marked the minutes. With mechanical indifference, across from him, Greg Whitmore scrolled through his phone, one leg crossed over the other. He hadn't said a word to Malik since they arrived. He didn't need to. His silence spoke louder than anything. Be still. Be quiet. Don't embarrass me. That's what he'd said before they left the house this morning. Tying Malik's shoes for him so tightly, the boy flinched. Malik had nodded. He always did. The hallway smelled like floor wax and dust. A guard passed by. Greg looked up, gave him a curt nod. Malik watched how he changed, how his mouth curved politely, his shoulders relaxed, like he could shed and wear. Faces depending on who stood in front of him. Narration flowed like water behind Malik's eyes. He wasn't always like this. He's not always mean. At first, Greg smiled more, gave him cereal with strawberries, bought him a baseball glove. It's fun. Said you're safe now. That was a lie. A soft one. The kind adults told when they didn't know what else to say, or when they didn't care if it was true. It had been 13 months since the last time Malik saw his real mother. He tried not to count, but his mind did it anyway. She had warm eyes, a low voice when she hummed. She used to braid his hair. But now, Greg cut it short every 2 weeks. Called it neat. The judge's door clicked. Malik blinked, suddenly aware of his heartbeat. He couldn't tell if it was nervousness or something else, something that lived deep in his chest, like a sleeping animal. Waiting, Greg stood, adjusted his tie, and looked down at him. "Let's go," he said. Voice clipped. Malik hesitated. The boy rose slowly, his limbs stiff, throat dry. Greg's hand touched his back, firm like a push. Inside that courtroom, everything would be different, but no one would know what it had cost Malik to sit there, to stand beside a man he couldn't call father. Not truly, not anymore. He glanced once toward the window at the end of the hallway. Just light and sky, then he walked forward. The clink of a spoon against ceramic echoed through the sterile kitchen. Greg's house was always quiet in the mornings, quiet like a held breath. Malik sat stiffly at the edge of his chair, feet barely touching the floor, eyes focused on the bowl of Cheerios in front of him. He moved slowly, careful not to slurp, careful not to draw attention. The sun filtered in through the wide window, washing the room in pale light. Everything was beigels, tiles, cabinets. Even the silence felt beige. Then, his elbow nudged the milk carton. It tipped. Milk spilled in a widening pool across the table, soaking into Greg's placemat, dripping onto the floor. Time cracked open. Greg didn't yell. He never did. His voice slid through the air like ice. "Malik," he said, laying his newspaper down neatly. "Do you ever think before you move?" Malik froze. He reached for a napkin, head down, but Greg's hand stopped him, mid-reach. "Leave it." Malik's chest tightened. He sat back slowly. Greg stared at the milk like it had insulted him personally. Then his eyes flicked to Malik, distended. "You know, a boy like you should be more grateful," he said, folding his arms. "You're not in some shelter. You've got a roof, clean clothes, someone who cares." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "You people don't realize how lucky you are." The words landed heavier than fists. Malik didn't respond. He couldn't. His throat felt like gravel. Kept his gaze locked on the mess on the table, hands clenched in. His lap. Narration swelled, heavy with memory. His mother never said things like that. When he spilled, she laughed, wiped it up with an old towel, said, "It's just milk, baby." Greg stood, grabbed a paper towel, and began cleaning the spill. With slow, deliberate movements, he shook his head and muttered, "Always making a mess." Malik stared at the window. There was a small crack in the glass he hadn't noticed before. Later, as he sat in the back seat on the way to school, he clutched that moment in his mind like a stone, heavy, sharp-edged, real. He knew better than to tell anyone, but someone else. had started to notice the silence wrapped around him. The bathroom door clicked shut with a soft finality. Malik locked it, twist, slide, click, just like always. He needed this room. Not for the space, but for the solitude. Steam clung to the mirror from the shower he'd just taken. And he stood there now, toweled around his shoulders, staring at the foggy glass. Slowly, he wiped it clear. A boy's face stared back. Brown skin. Wide, dark eyes. Tight curls pressed down from Greg's latest haircut. A faint bruise on the neck, barely visible beneath the collarbone. He touched the mirror, fingers trembling. Who am I in this house? The question formed silently, without words. It didn't need them. It looked like someone who didn't belong. Here, like a photo taped to the wrong wall, he turned his face side to side, studying the shape of his nose, the thickness of his lips, the sadness in his eyes. Greg never said the word black unless it was about the news. Always with a sigh. Always with a warning. And at school, people didn't talk to Malik much unless they needed help on homework or wanted to touch his hair. He hated that the most narration coiled tighter. He remembered being 6, sitting in his mother's lap, her voice humming in his ear. She called him my little lion, said his hair was like a crown. She told him stories about his ancestors, about survival, about joy. That was before the courts decided she was unfit. Before they took him away, it had been 422 days since he heard her voice. He counted them at night. When Greg was asleep, Malik would lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if she still had his drawings on the fridge. If she still lit that cinnamon candle in the kitchen. If she missed him. If she knew he missed her so much his chest hurt, he didn't cry. Not anymore. Crying made Greg angry, but tonight felt heavier. He walked slowly to his room, the hallway. Dark, except for a sliver of light from beneath Greg's door. Tiptoed, careful, quiet, heart thumping in his room. Beneath the pillow right where he always checked was the photograph folded, worn at the corners. Smudged from fingers and time, a black woman smiled from the image, holding a baby in her arms. Leek stared at it in the dim light, his thumb tracing the edge. His mother, iced her smile, had strength in it, like she was looking straight through the photo and into him, reminding him who he was. Not a problem, not a burden, not a mistake. He slid the photo back under the pillow and curled up, arms tight around himself. Tonight, he wouldn't dream of Greg's house. He would dream of cinnamon candles and lullabies, and in the days that followed, someone else would begin to notice the silence that clung to him like a second skin. Ms. Rivera first noticed the bruises during morning attendance. Malik had rolled up his sleeve to scratch his elbow, revealing a faint purple mark just above his forearm. It wasn't big, but it wasn't nothing. She said nothing at first, just marked his name and watched as he sat down, shoulders hunched, eyes dull. His homework was neat, always was, but his name at the top was written so small it looked like it wanted to disappear. She saw kids like Malik before, kids who moved carefully, kids who didn't laugh even when they wanted to. That afternoon, as the class filed out, she asked him to stay back. Malik? Her voice was gentle, the kind that asked, not demanded. He stopped at his desk, didn't look up. I saw something on your arm this morning, she said. Are you okay? He hesitated, eyes fixed on the carpet. I'm fine. I just want to make sure you're safe. I'm fine, he repeated, quieter this time. Narration swelled behind the moment. She saw the wall go up fast and practiced. Not fear, exactly. Something older than that. Something closer to surrender. She let him go, but didn't forget. That evening, she pulled up the school's incident report system. She had seen enough subtle signs, sudden changes in behavior, bruises, isolation. She began documenting date, time, observed demeanor, all without jumping to conclusions. The next morning, she approached the school counselor, Mr. Tomlinson. Worried about one of my students, Malik Whitmore, she said. He's withdrawn, has visible marks on his arm, and something doesn't feel right. Tomlinson frowned, unconcerned. That kid is with that Whitmore guy, right? Solid. Guy. Lawyer, I think. Took the kid in, after the mother went off the rails. You know how those cases go. Her face stiffened. I still think we should check in. It's maybe a welfare visit? He sighed. Look, you're new here. Thinks if there's something serious, it'll come out eventually. No need to cause unnecessary drama. She walked away with a pit forming in her stomach. Narration tightened. Institutions didn't always need violence to do harm. Sometimes silence was just as brutal. That night, Ms. Rivera opened a private notebook at her kitchen table. She began her own log, handwritten, careful, relentless, because she knew what it meant to be overlooked, to go unheard, to be half seen. She wasn't going to let Malik vanish. And as the days passed, someone else would step into the frame, a caseworker whose job was to look, but who now had to choose whether to see. Angela Fields parked in front of the Whitmore house, with her clipboard balanced on the passenger seat and a manila folder tucked beneath her arm. Her GPS had brought her through quiet, manicured streets, the kind where everything looked clean, and everyone pretended nothing bad ever happened. This was her third house call of the day, but something about this one felt heavier. The door opened before she could knock. Greg Whitmore smiled, practiced. Polite, Angela, right? Come on in, he said, stepping aside. The inside of the house matched the outside. Neat, controlled, impersonal. It's a kind of clean that felt like a performance. Malik was already seated at the kitchen table, hands folded, eyes down. Angela crossed the room slowly. Hi, Malik. I'm Ms. Fields. I'm just here to check in, see how everything's going. He gave a small nod but said nothing. She crouched beside him, keeping her voice soft. How's school? Anything you want to tell me? Malik's fingers tightened slightly. His eyes darted toward Greg, then back to the table. Nothing, Angela. Glanced at the table's edge. Corner of worn paper peeked out from under Malik's palm. Can I see what you're holding? She asked gently. Malik hesitated, then slowly turned over the photo. A woman smiled from the faded picture, holding a baby close. Angela's heart clenched. Greg stepped forward, voice still smooth. He keeps that thing everywhere. Don't mind, it's good for him to remember where he came from. Malik flinched. It was subtle. A tiny movement of the shoulder, but Angela saw it. Narration pressed inward. She'd worked cases where the bruises were visible, the harm undeniable. But this was the other kind. The kind that lived in silences, glances, and things unsaid. Angela stood. Mind if I talk to Malik alone? Hesitated. Of course. But we've got a family dinner soon, so if we could keep this brief. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. When Greg left the room, Malik's breathing changed. Not relief, not calm. Just ... stillness. Angela didn't push him. Instead, she made a note in her file. Observation. Fear-based silence. Possible emotional control. Recommending further review. Before she left, she looked Malik in the eyes. If you ever need to talk, she said, I'll be listening. You don't have to say anything yet. He nodded. Barely. But that night, for the first time in weeks, Malik hid the photo in his backpack instead of under the pillow. The time for silence was running out. The next time he spoke, it would be in a courtroom under oath. The courtroom was too quiet, the kind of quiet that made your ears hum. Malik sat in the witness chair, his feet dangling above the polished floor, hands pressed together so tightly they ached. His backpack, stuffed with the photo of his mother, sat beside him like a shield. Angela Fields sat behind him. Ms. Rivera had taken personal leave to be there too. Neither spoke, but their presence wrapped around him like a whisper of protection. Greg sat just 20 feet away at the defendant's table, his hands folded neatly, wearing that same smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. His lawyer, smooth and rehearsed, had already spoken words like discipline, structure. Misunderstood had floated through the room like perfume, meant to cover up the rot. The judge, tall white man with thin glasses and tired eyes, looked down. From the bench, Malik, he said gently. Do you understand why you're here today? Malik didn't speak. His throat clenched, and slowly he nodded. Double quotes. Yes. Narration swelled, memories surging behind the silence. The winter night when Greg locked him outside because he left his shoes by the door. "You'll learn if your toes go numb," Greg had said. The phone call Greg thought Malik couldn't hear, laughing with someone, using the N-word like it was just another brick in his vocabulary. The morning Greg told him, "You're lucky I even took you in. Your kind doesn't usually get this far." Malik's voice cracked through the courtroom like a splinter breaking open. "He's not my real father." Everyone stilled. Greg blinked. Malik's lip quivered, but he kept going. "He's not my real dad. My real mom, she didn't hurt me. She sang to me. She held me. He hurts with words." Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't wipe them. He didn't look at Greg. He looked at the judge, his voice growing steadier. "I don't feel safe there. I don't feel like me." Description carved the moment. The judge leaned back, his face unreadable. Stenographer stopped typing for just a second. Angela's hands folded in her lap, squeezed tighter. Behind her, Ms. Rivera's eyes shimmered. Malik reached into his backpack, pulled out the worn photo, unfolded it slowly, and held it up. "This is my real family." Gasps fluttered in the courtroom like rustling leaves. The lawyer beside Greg leaned in to whisper. Greg's jaw tightened. The judge spoke again, carefully. "Malik, thank you. That's enough for now." Malik nodded once, chest rising, shoulders finally dropping an inch. He stepped down from the stand slowly, photo still in hand. As he walked past Greg's table, he didn't flinch this time. He didn't need to. Narration pulled back. It wasn't just what he said. It was that he said it in front of strangers, in front of power. He didn't whisper his truth. He gave it shape. He returned to his seat beside Angela, who met his gaze with a small nod. Quiet promise. The judge called for a recess. The gavel echoed like thunder. But not everyone had heard what was said. In the very back row, a woman had quietly wept through it, all waiting to be seen. The courtroom buzzed in the aftermath of Malik's words. Attorneys murmured. Pens scratched paper. The judge stepped away behind polished doors. But in the very back row, beyond where anyone had bothered to look, a woman sat frozen back straight, hands clasped tight in her lap. Cynthia Reynolds hadn't moved since Malik took the stand. She hadn't blinked much either. Her eyes stayed fixed on the boy she hadn't held in over a year, her son. Her baby now with a voice of fire, tears trailed silently down her cheeks, drying on skin that had weathered storms few in the room could name. Narration flooded through her memories. The courtroom months ago, bright lights, cold stares. She had stood alone in secondhand shoes and a blouse too big, trying to explain why she'd missed work twice, why the utility bill hadn't been paid, why she once left Malik with a neighbor for a few hours while she worked a double shift. They asked about her record 1 arrest, 10 years ago. Possession, expunged. Didn't matter. They called her unstable. Unfit, the judge said. Greg Whitmore had the job, the house, the clean slate. He had whiteness too, though no one said that part aloud. Cynthia had sat in this exact seat during that hearing. Malik hadn't been allowed to look back then. She hadn't been allowed to speak freely. Her voice then was too angry, too passionate, too emotional, the court transcript read. Now her son was in that same box, and this time he was allowed to speak. And what he'd said had cracked the air like lightning. Her fingers grazed her necklace. The small lion pendant Malik gave her when he was 5. "So you don't forget," he'd said. She never did. From the front row, Angela Fields turned, just for a moment. Their eyes met. No words passed between them, but Cynthia felt something. Lift. She rose slowly from her seat, wiped her face, and walked to the hallway where the boy had sat that morning. Her legs trembled. The past was still heavy, but outside that courtroom, something else was beginning a gathering, a rising. A quiet ripple becoming a wave. The church basement was warm with bodies and low voices, folding chairs lined in imperfect rows. The walls were hung with faded banners, faith over fear. Community is power, and the smell of sweet tea and old hymnals drifted through the air. Word had spread. Ms. Rivera stood by the coffee table, pouring lemonade into tiny cups. Angela Field sat near the front, clipboard set aside for once. Cynthia hovered by the door at first, unsure. But an older woman from the choir had taken her hand and whispered, "Come sit with us, baby." So she did. Reverend Paul stepped up to the front, gray hair shining under the lights. "We are gathered tonight because too many of us have stories like Malak's," he began. "Too many families torn apart. Too many voices dismissed until they shatter under pressure. But tonight, we listen. Tonight we witness." Heads nodded. Eyes glistened. Narration weaved through the room. A father in the third row clenched his jaw. He remembered social workers who never called back. A teacher near the window kept thinking of a student she hadn't been able to help. Cynthia sat beside Ms. Rivera, hands trembling in her lap, as if hearing her own pain read aloud. Then, from the back, Malak stood. His voice was soft, softer than the hum of the old heater, but the room hushed to hear it. "I didn't think anyone would believe me," he said. "But you did. You saw me." He swallowed, eyes flitting to Angela, then Cynthia. "I remember when my mom used to sing to me. It made me feel like I was whole. I think ... when people believe you, it's kind of the same. It's like you're not invisible anymore." The silence afterward was sacred. Cynthia cried openly now, shoulders shaking. Ms. Rivera placed a hand over hers. Angela stood to speak, her voice low and steady. "Malak's story is not rare, but his courage, something we need to protect." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Scriptions softened. A candle was lit in the corner, a symbol, not for prayer, but for light. One light passed hand to hand until the shadows began to pull back. And though justice hadn't been decided yet, Malik had already begun to find what he was truly missing: home. The court hadn't ruled yet. The final decision was still days away, wrapped in paperwork, procedure, and the deliberate slowness of the legal system. But tonight, Malak wasn't at Greg's house. He wasn't watching his words or sitting stiff. At a spotless table, he was home. The social worker had called it a temporary placement. Cynthia didn't care what they called it. All she knew was that her baby had walked through her door with his backpack clutched to his chest and tears in his eyes, and that he hadn't let go of her hand since. Now he sat cross-legged on the living room rug, head tilted forward as Cynthia gently combed through his short hair. No buzzcat, no clippers. Just the rhythm of her fingers moving tenderly, slowly, like she was memorizing the shape of him all over again. The TV played quietly in the background, some cartoon they weren't really watching. The room smelled like cinnamon and cocoa butter. "I used to hum when I did your hair," she said softly. Malik nodded. "I remember." Narration flowed between them. The world outside might still doubt her. The court might still question her past. But in this small apartment, with its mismatched cushions and flickering floor lamp, none of that mattered. What mattered was the boy leaning against her knee, warm and breathing and real. When she finished, she set the comb aside and leaned forward. "You feel okay?" Malak looked up at her, and for the first time in a long time there was no hesitation. In his answer, "I feel like me," she smiled, the kind of smile that cracks open the dark. He reached out, wrapped his small fingers around hers. "Held tight, I missed you every day," he whispered. "I know, baby," she said, voice shaking. "I missed you too." Description wrapped the moment. Outside, street lights glowed against the window. The world was still spinning, still uncertain. But in this room, in this quiet, a different kind of verdict had already been delivered. But Malak still had questions. One in particular had been waiting in the shadows, and tomorrow he would ask it. The next morning, sunlight warmed the edge of Malak's blanket before his eyes even opened. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't press against his chest. It's just birds outside and the low creak of Cynthia in the kitchen. He rose slowly, toes touching the cool floor, and walked down the hall. The table sat a folded newspaper. Greg Whitmore, under investigation for alleged abuse, misconduct. Angela had promised the truth would surface, and it had. Neighbors were speaking up. Past reports had been ignored. His charm had masked more than the court ever saw. But now his power was slipping. Still, Malik barely glanced at the headline. His mind was somewhere else. Ma. Cynthia turned at the stove, spatula in hand. Morning, baby? He hesitated in the doorway, rubbing his arm. Can I ask you something? She nodded. Of course. He sat at the table, voice low. What was my real dad like? She stopped, set the pan aside. Came to sit across from him. He died before you turned two, she said gently. But he loved you more than anything. What happened? Narration slowed with memory. She stared past the window for a long moment. There was a protest. A black man had been killed by police downtown. Your father, David, he marched? With the others, peaceful, holding a sign. I was pregnant at the time. There was tear gas, chaos. He stayed back to help an older woman who fell. They hit him with a baton. He never woke up. Malik didn't speak. His breath hitched. But he was brave, she added, voice strong. He believed in standing. Up for people leavin' when it cost him. She reached into the drawer and pulled out an old Polaroid. A tall man with kind eyes, holding a baby wrapped in a lion-printed blanket. That was the day he called you his little king, she whispered. Said your name would carry strength. Malik traced the photo, eyes soft. He sounds like me, he said. No, baby, she said, eyes full of tears. You sound like him. Description built slowly. Later that day, Malik stood in the bathroom again. Same mirror, same frame. But this time he didn't look away. He saw his skin, his eyes, his roots. Not a reflection of pain, but of power. Not invisible. Not erased. Present, seen, whole. He smiled. Just a little. Narration closed with truth. He didn't need Greg to call himself father. Came from people who sang in the dark, who marched through gas, who told the truth even when the world didn't want to hear it. Malik turned from the mirror and walked into the light.